This was a great panel to have at this time, because next up in our schedule, we're going to bring you two leading aviation experts. So they're going to finish some of these conversations, and maybe we'll answer some of that question that I just asked. But they've promised to hold a thought-provoking conversation on the future they see for regional airlines. So they'll present their analysis, and then they're going to open the floor for questions around the industry. Now, we've given you a break for coffee. Please use the microphones that you see there. But next, we'll be welcoming two longtime aviation analysts, Jon Ostrower and Courtney Miller from the Air Current. The Air Current is an in-depth reporting and analysis resource for the aviation industry. If you're not reading the Air Current or benefiting from some of their data analysis, I would encourage you to check it out. They're covering aviation and including regional aviation in a very thoughtful way. Jon Ostrower is editor-in-chief of the Air Current. He's a journalist as well as a self-described chaser of things that fly. That's right, Jon, I found my way to your Twitter profile. Prior to launching the Air Current in June 2018, Ostrower served as the aviation editor for CNN Worldwide, guiding the network's global coverage of the business and operations of flying. Ostrower joined CNN in 2016, following 4.5 years at the Wall Street Journal and Flight Global. After nearly 2 decades in this industry, Courtney Miller has a breadth of experience spanning operations, fleet, sales and network planning, cargo planning, market forecasting, data analytics, and many of you remember him from his time with Bombardier and on RAA's Associate Member Council. The founder and managing director of Visual Approach, providing data and insights to the aviation industry. Courtney also provides analysis as managing director of analysis for the Air Current. Earlier, Courtney spent time with DHL and began his career as a pilot for Comair. Jon and Courtney will present their analysis and the future they see for regional airlines, but this conversation will really be most useful if you are in it. So please make use of the microphones, and please join me in welcoming Jon and Courtney.
Do a mic check here. Can you hear me okay? Good. Good morning. So get some high energy going at the RAA, you know, another 2 or 3 cups of coffee. It's nice to be back and acting in the same place. Courtney joined me at the Air Current in, I think, the first week of February 2020, the halcyon days of the first week of February 2020. We thought 2020 was going to look very different than it did. His first piece was about this thing called coronavirus. It wasn't even called COVID then. And needless to say, we jumped in feet first on the Air Current to try and figure out what the heck this new industry was going to look like. So my background is in media. I Wall Street Journal, Flight Global, CNN, and the Air Current was really a culmination to kind of put together the next generation of aviation media publication. Kind of get past the sort of what happened and just sort of tell you, you know, what press releases or whatever, to really kind of go forward looking and say, hey, okay, why did this happen? And we really think that's the next generation of coverage of this incredible industry. And so I'm on the media side. Courtney's on the data and analysis side, really kind of balancing out the different perspectives here. So it's really been an incredibly valuable partnership to bring our brains to paper or electrons in this case, and you know, give you guys a chance to kind of walk through what we see. I think this is the next. This is the clicker. Okay, so this is the big picture for where we are in terms of regional aircraft ASK for, you know, across the world. So from, you know, 2009 through 2019, things were pretty level and have remained sort of at that kind of you know, naturally oscillating quarter by quarter flow. But you know, you might notice if you look, you can squint, you might just see a little bit of a change there in 2020, where literally the bottom fell out with COVID. But this really establishes sort of the macro context for how we see airline operations, you know, whether it's regional, whether it's domestic operations, short haul, and international. So it's really instructive sort of trend that we kind of establish the baseline of kind of where we are. I think one of the things that also it tells us is that the U.S. regional airline industry, or the North American regional airline industry, has been stable but flat. There's not a whole lot of growth in that trend over the 2009 through 2019 period. So we find ourselves in a really different situation as the industry adjusts to COVID and sort of asks itself, what is a regional airline at this point in aviation? So obviously, OEMs focusing their growth, principally in replacement around North America and Western Europe, and the opportunity in Northeast Asia for new products. So what we do at the Air Current, periodically we have a newsletter called 3 Points, and we figured that was a really good way to establish sort of, again, where we are for the industry right now. So we want to hit on three big themes. So planes, pilots, and the planet. So when it comes to new aircraft, I think it's really interesting. Largely speaking, Americans don't like turboprops. I think that's a very well-grounded reality in terms of consumer behavior, with a gigantic however attached to that. If you look at what's on the drawing board right now, barring a change in scope, with the E175 E2 becoming a viable option for US airlines to fly, every single aircraft between 9 and 90 seats is currently on the drawing board, is currently a turboprop. There are no jets that are incoming. That really says a lot about what passengers are going to expect around regional aircraft going forward. It's not a jet industry after 2030. Obviously, with we have the E175 in operation now, the CRJ fleet. I think there's going to be a shift that we're going to see over time, where these new aircraft, if they go from their conceptual to launch phase, are really going to become a part of this. We've got at the top, we've got Embraer with their concept TPNG, Deutsche Aircraft reviving the 328 jet, and now a 328 Eco back into turboprop mode. And also we look at hybrid electric, the concept from de Havilland. So really, when we talk about this globally, what happens between different markets, China is going to be a huge part of that, principally because of their protection of their own domestic market for regional operations, which is going to drive certainly the opportunity for OEMs in the West to get access to that market, otherwise being able to pay for types of developments they want elsewhere in the world. So I think it's going to be an interesting dynamic that's at play. I'll let Courtney kind of jump in on that first point.
Yeah, so anytime, and this is why I joined Jon, and a lot of the work that I do is to really kind of address and just look at context and perspectives and really kind of challenge some of the things that we're seeing today. I love to be contrarian, just because people telling me I'm crazy kind of motivates me to do crazier things. But the one piece of perspective I think we have to keep in mind is that whatever the new normal is, this is not it. We are not there yet. We're in the most unprecedented, because truly, now that I write for Jon, I spend so much time on thesaurus.com trying to find words to say unprecedented, but that's it. We are in unprecedented times, but where we are going, we are not there yet. I've heard so many people say business travel is gone, it's never coming back. No, it's gonna come back. We don't necessarily know when. We know it's coming back. Oh, traffic is terrible, there's no international travel. There will be. We haven't even reached these inflection points. In fact, I would invite you to look at our neighbors to the north just to see what happens when you can start to let people travel again. And Canada went from, I think, about 7% of 2019 numbers to over 40% within a couple weeks. These travel restrictions still exist. So what we're interested in now is, okay, we know the pandemic, we know how bad it can be, wherever wood is. What's next? And this is where the aircraft kind of come in. What are we looking at for the industry, particularly as it applies to the regional side, where, by the way, a lot of pressure is right now. And I say that because there is a ton of, I don't want to say hype, but I don't want to say work. So whatever's in the middle of that, that's taking place on the high end with hydrogen, Airbus. They're really excited about that. There are movements being done. There's a lot on the low end. Everybody thinks they can build an electric unmanned free airplane, apparently. On the small end, there's really nothing, and a lot of target is being placed right on the US industry and the regional side. And that's really where we get to with the aircraft. Jon mentioned turboprops are really all that are on the horizon. There are no orders that I'm aware of for any of the top 3 airplanes. And yet these are the 3 engineering organizations that we know of in the regional industry. There are hundreds, plurals of orders for eVTOLs, electric, pick your name of whatever you want to call them. And what does that tell us? It tells us that, I pick on Embraer because it's easy, and they're one of the most just capable engineering organizations in the world. Why are there no firm orders for this? Because airlines know that when you place an order with Embraer, they are going to show up with an airplane at your doorstep. That is not necessarily the case in other places of the industry right now. That perspective is so key. But I think when it comes to aircraft, what's so important is understanding that there's a hype, there's an anti-hype. How do we find relevance in the middle? I use a lot of just these contextual items. If we replace the entire 19-seat and below sector with zero carbon emissions, we would remove as much carbon from the atmosphere as we would if the entire sub 110-seat regional industry reduced fuel burn by 2%. So the challenge is, what are you doing to get your 2%? Because then that needs to be 5, then that needs to be 10. And that's the path to 100. So when we look at airplanes, these are kind of the things that we're looking at, not necessarily what's happening now, what's coming next in the industry on the aircraft side. As far as the lovely pilots that I was once one, recovering, I'll pass it back to Jon.
Well, with COVID, obviously we're coming out of this and we're seeing a major amplification of a short and long-term pilot shortage. In the short term, it's seniority lists adjusting to retirement, to retraining, to seeing up with the operational challenges that the airlines had to ramp up quickly after being down 95% just a few months before that. And so, what we find ourselves over the medium term really focuses on what happens to operations relative to not having enough pilots in the long term. And one of the things that we've spent a lot of time reporting on recently focuses on single pilot operations. And certainly, I think the consensus is that technically single pilot operations are possible now. There are Part 23 aircraft flying with a single pilot with no regulatory hurdle whatsoever, quite common. However, has not made that jump to Part 25. A lot of that is for a lot of reasons, whether it's labor, whether it's societal acceptance, whether it's a regulatory framework to effectively establish that. But I think one of the things that has really gone unreported, which is the way we like it at the Aircraft, because we like to do the reporting on it, is that if you look at those aircraft at the top, particularly Embraer and Deutsche, as they make their technology selections, they are talking about provisioning for single pilot operations at the outset. So regardless of whether or not the regulatory framework and the social acceptance is there for operations for Part 25 single pilot operations, they are making those choices now and laying that groundwork to be ready for that. And Deutsche in particular has said that the provisioning for single pilot with their Garmin G5000, and Embraer is going through its own supplier selection prior to launch of the TPNG. And one of the big questions in their minds is, how do you look at new technology to make this possible? And I think that's really going to be one of the things that actually probably breaks significant commonality, not just from a flying characteristics perspective between a turboprop and a jet, but really being able to use pilots back and forth potentially between those aircraft. I don't think it's probably going to be on the table given the technology choices that are being made right now. So certainly they are laying the foundation for this. And I think that's going to be one of the major trends we see over the next 10 years as societal acceptance kind of moves in that direction.
Yeah, so it's a crowd favorite. You can stand up at RAA and say pilot shortage all day long. It's how I made a career leading into this. Here's the thing, that pilot shortage that we had in the good old days, back when that was like the biggest problem? Yeah, so we just took that pilot shortage and the remaining, and the pilot group, the size of the US regional industry was just lopped off the top of the mainline seniority lists. So I'm not talking about the shortage, the shortage of pilots we had. I'm talking about the entire regional industry's worth of pilots just left the top of those seniority lists. And for the first time, we're starting to hear mainline airlines starting to have a serious issue with, well, labor shortage. It's all over the place. It's not just pilots today. As I thought Chip had a great point on, where the choke points currently are, and those are going to bob and weave as we go through. But we have a lot of challenges today. The pilot shortage may not necessarily be the current one. It's going to be again. It's going to drive a lot of these technologies. I mean, it's a great irony of the labor unions that, well, you need us, there is no shortage, just pay us more. And then if we can immediately cut them in half, then what happens? The problem is that we may be forced to do that in order to keep up not only with just replacing and keeping the flying that we have, but then growing into the traffic that, by the way, is still growing. GDP numbers are well above 2019 numbers today. I think that's something that gets lost a lot in the conversation of reduced traffic. That giant market force that's pulling travel back to the skies is only being held down by the short-term, hopefully, outbreaks, the travel restrictions, and eventually those will meld into the market that we know. We are going to need pilots. We are going to need flight attendants. We are going to need mechanics. The technology going forward, I think we're gonna be limited. This is going to be the bottleneck, and that is going to push technology forward into some of these single pilot, maybe no pilot operations. I can almost hear the groans when the word single pilot is mentioned, and it's not because we can't. I was a pilot. It's very easy. Technically, we've been able to do this for decades. There's a reason that we can, and that's because we still have to deal with people, right? We still have labor. We still have the proof of safety. These are all things that we're constantly going to be facing in this industry. And the problem for the regional airline industry in particular, and particularly in the US with the size of the regional airline industry, is that for the mainline industry, the recruiting process is simple, and that's take your pilots, right? So the progress that has been done and has been made leading in has, by the way, has been phenomenal. I mean, you can't discount the work that the regional airlines have done in building this recruiting structure, but it just got a lot worse. So we're going to have to keep pushing and make it really accelerate, I guess is the word I'm looking for, accelerate this process and make sure that pipeline is there. Because the third item here that John's about to talk about really starts to push some things in the direction that we need to be very aware of. And with that, I'll pass it back to John.
So show of hands, how many people know how many billions of gallons of fuel US Airlines burned in 2019? Yeah, that's not a fact that you would actually know, but it's 18.25 billion, 18.26 billion gallons of fuel. Okay, how many did they burn 20 years before that? Higher or lower? Yes? Lower? Lower? It's higher. 19 billion in 2000, in 1999, 18.26 in 2019. That's a pretty amazing fact, because obviously when we talk about the future of this industry relative to its ability to be productive economically, but also environmentally. And so certainly those numbers are very instructive as we kind of get into what now we have is a very clear, but often very PR-driven ESG strategy, which has airlines buying hundreds of eVTOL aircraft. Again, that doesn't remove any carbon at all. It actually puts a burden on the power system to develop electricity to actually fill those batteries. So I think we need to kind of come at where we are right now environmentally with understanding the different pressures around the globe in terms of what's happening in Europe and what's happening in the United States to inform how this industry moves forward in terms of, again, as Court said, a 2% improvement in 110 seats down is the entire 19-seat carbon contribution. And I think as we really look at this and really look at new technology, we have an amazing, I mean, I would have a time machine, but right now we are sitting in 1921 when it comes to the development of new industry and new propulsion. You look at the different S curves of gas turbine and piston engines, and we are right at the dawn of new propulsion. And right now we are really talking about not quite being there yet in terms of going from a Lockheed Electra to a 707, but we're not really quite there yet also in going from a 787 back to electric, or to electric rather. So I think we're at a very interesting inflection point where the industry stands right now in terms of its investment in real ESG, in terms of new technology and how that all fits together. But certainly, those airplanes at the bottom, that's the Eviation Alice. On the left, that's the Tecnam P-Volt in the middle, and the Heart Aerospace ES-19. And each one actually has airline orders. So DHL for Alice, Cape Air and Vitero for the P-Volt, and United Express for the ES-19. So again, we see a push in this direction. Certainly the economics of that, which Court will talk about, are certainly different than I think public perception is being made to present.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, if you've read the last piece, which you all will be able to very shortly, is good news, is spoiler alert. Look, there are three main problems that this new generation of electric aircraft are facing, and those three are F, A, and A times three. Look, we know the challenges of being in this industry. I was just delivered, come to think of it, one of the best compliments I've gotten since I left the OEM world, which is, you don't get electric aviation, you're thinking about it from an industry perspective. Shouldn't you? Right? That's the challenge. But that also leads to, look, ESG is huge. I don't hear a lot of it here. At the RAA, we don't talk about, it's not a big part of the conversation that we have at the RAA. Everywhere else, it's massive. Every investor that I talk to today wants to know about the ESG score of a certain portfolio, or what can they do to make sure that they're meeting their ESG requirements that they've promised to their investors. The regional aircraft industry, especially in the United States, probably needs to catch up to that. I think there's a real risk here with ESG, and just understanding just how critically important that it is to your partners, but more importantly to the lessors and financiers that are providing aircraft to your partners, and to the regional airline industry, and then the investors that are providing the funds to them. That is leaving the regional airline industry in the middle. That's kind of the point I want to deliver here, is to not get stuck in the middle, because there's one other boogeyman that I like to call the boogeyman, because it's something that we haven't paid much attention to, but is a real risk to pay attention to, and that's Google. Yeah, my Android shocks me every time I say that. But what you don't know about Google is that they have now, or you probably do, they have now provided a way to score your carbon emissions based on how you fly. That sounds great. We all want to reduce our carbon footprint. Here's the problem with that. The absolute easiest way to reduce your carbon emissions, especially from a company who cares and really wants to make sure that their employees are being sustainable when they travel, the easiest way for them to do that is to fly the largest airplane available. That is by far the easiest way to reduce the carbon footprint. Now, we know what happens when they do that. Airlines say, okay, well, I get big airplanes, to have United Airlines, right? And the largest upgauging that they're gonna do, in their history. And then what do? Okay, I have empty seats, so discount them. Oh, great, now costs have come down, ticket prices have come down, we need more big airplanes. You've actually introduced carbon into the environment, flying airplanes that are too large. That pressure is gonna come back onto the regional airlines. The other pressure, and we are in the United States, we're in the capital of the United States, watch Europe very, very closely. The pressures coming from Europe on carbon, watch what France is doing with domestic. Watch what happens to domestic French traffic. Watch what happens to international French traffic. We don't know which way this is going to go, by the way. France likes to say that we're not going to have domestic flights on those markets. The problem is nobody was flying domestically on those flights anyway. They were all connecting through Paris to go to, say, Beijing, Manila, New York. If I'm Emirates now, great, thank you for disrupting your connectivity. I'm going to drop a 777 in and throw a bunch of carbon in the atmosphere into French atmosphere, right? So we don't know how these things are going to play out. But right now, I would say the other boogeyman, and be very careful of this, the other boogeyman is really us, is the regional airline industry, because there's nothing, all the attention is on the Airbus, not so much Boeing, but on the Airbus side, on the high end, on the extremely low end, with eVTOL, with urban air mobility. But it's in this middle where a lot of the pressure is being applied right now, and it's on the ESG aspect. And these are the things that, if we look beyond the pandemic, when we assume that we are going to solve the labor shortage, these are the pressures that are coming to the regional industry. And so what I would suggest is, make sure, of course, look, the community of the RAA, the board's heard me say this over and over again, is critically important. You need to stay a community, interact, engage, work with FAE, and help FAE to work with the ERA in Europe, because it's all now one, right? These are kind of the new things that we look at when we kind of look beyond, okay, what's happening now? Everybody's freaking out about no business travel. Everybody's freaking out about travel restrictions. What's coming? And this is what we see.
So these are our 3 points for you today, and I think it's really important that you've come all this way. You've come all this way. You've decided this is not a Zoom call for you. This is something you want to be here, and it's nice to see many of you from the nose up after all these years. So this is excellent. You've been incredibly generous with your time, and obviously we've just given you a nutshell in terms of the things that keep us up at night and what we work on day in and day out. But we want to make sure that you guys obviously have the ability to digest these points in a much larger form of what we do. And so, we would be remiss if we didn't take this opportunity to also provide an opportunity for you to have the air current. And we want to, so everyone at RAA gets the air current over for the next 3 months for free. This is our TAC Pro. I'm going into sales pitch mode for a moment, forgive me, but you'll get PDFs with that to share with your staff, your leadership, your strategy, your communications teams, marketing, to make sure everyone has sort of access to what we do. Because we don't want you just to hear us drone on for 20 minutes about what we think is happening. We want to give you a chance to sit quietly with our data, with our analysis, and with our reporting to make sure it really informs what you guys are doing. So you can point your cell phone camera up at this code here. It'll take you to a website where you just pop that in to sign up, or you can go to raa.theaircurrent.com. We'll get you there also. This has been tremendous. You've been a wonderful audience, and thank you so much. And hopefully we can jump into some questions and really continue this really lively, I'm feeling lively, debate around future.
I don't have a mask. I'm just excited.
Yeah.
One analysis. So you'll have access to everything that we've published in the past. One that I would suggest, and it gives you an idea for how we work. And just the things that are happening today that John's great, because if he's like, hey, what about this? And I say, it's just not interesting, then we don't do it. But we wrote about the coming simulator backlog, the coming pilot shortage. We wrote about that in May, June.
It was April
of 2020.
Yeah.
Right. So these are the type of things that it was a fascinating, that aged well, poorly, depending on your perspective. But these are the type of things that we're looking at, and that was 16, 17 months ago. The analysis, again, I really dig the contrarian point of view anyway.
It's, I think we're really at an interesting point in the industry right now. I think this is, like I said, these years right now are going to really define what the 2030s and 40s look like, because again, we're in that sort of middle ground between seeing one dominant mode of propulsion take over for another, and people want to make that jump between trains. I think understanding how those trends affect the established industry today is going to be really incredibly crucial. And so, I mean, look, it's the de Havilland Comet flew in 1949. And it took probably another 20 years beyond that before jet propulsion was really fully a democratic exercise with the advent of the 747 and the A300 and the DC-10 and the 1011 coming along. So I think it's going to be a long transition. History has shown that. So I think it's going to be incredibly crucial, again, to understand those dynamics as we go forward. But any questions or? Nope.
I've got one question here from the chat, from Q&A, in fact. And I think you may have covered it, but I'll just read this here. It's from Mark Hale at A-Tier Solutions. The business passenger has been a prime driver for revenue. Have we lost him to Zoom meetings and the air charter industry?
Oh, this is great. This is okay. I'm gonna tee Courtney up here. Okay, so Courtney did an analysis a couple weeks ago that was fascinating. He actually looked at premium economy, the recovery of premium economy travel in the post-COVID era, and his findings were really, really interesting. I really enjoyed reading it. I'm not only writing it, I actually really enjoy like taking in what this guy has to say and what he learns. So I'll just, I'll hand it over to him for that one. But the trends are fascinating.
Yeah, look, I mean, so we look worldwide, look at the trends of traffic by service level. I look at all sorts of things. 95% of them become nothing, which is about my success rate. But this one actually is quite interesting in that we're looking at the recovery of economy versus basic economy versus, or just so discount economy, premium economy, business, and then whatever you call first. And what's interesting is discount economy, everybody's back on Spirit Airlines, we think, and everything's going to leisure, and basic economy should be awesome, right? Well, it's not doing poorly. What's interesting though is the recovery in full fare economy, but specifically premium economy. And we're seeing a lot of shift into that mode. Now that's due to a lot of things. One, premium economy coming back because of business travel, more airlines calling things premium economy than they did before. But as it pertains to business travel, I think it's interesting to deliver a response to a group of people who have decided to do business travel in the last couple of days based on a question from somebody who's not, right? Because that's part of the challenge that we're looking at is each of the companies allowing business travel to come back. Here's what I would say. We're not in the new normal. Business travel will come back. The question is when. After 9/11, I remember saying and seeing the exact same things. After 2008, we saw and heard the same things. We have our once every 10-year cycle. This one's a little bit bigger than the other ones. There is no reason that business travel will not come back. And I think that's key to remember. Nothing has fundamentally changed with the ability of doing business and the reason to do business face-to-face. And I would separate that from the idea that working from home and business travel are the same thing, because they're two very, very different things. Remote work and business travel, there are arguments that remote work will reduce business travel. There are some great arguments that remote work will increase business travel. The core of the matter is, and granted, I approach this from more of a sales aspect, because that's a lot of the type of business travel that I did. And I'll use my friend as an anecdote. He never knows that I've been using him for months now. But he's in tax planning and he has clients all over the US. And he said, "This is great. I can do everything by phone. I don't have to go and visit my clients anymore." He said, "I think my travel days are over." I said, "Cool. What are you going to do when your competitor shows up?" He said, "I'm on an airplane that afternoon." You kidding me? And that's where the FOMO, that's where it starts. It becomes self-feeding. We haven't seen that yet. Right? Business travel will come back. That's great for the regional airlines because the regional airlines, are a function of that connectivity. It also applies to international travel, right? Where the regional airlines are just as critical to provide that connectivity. I don't know. That's a long drawn out answer. I tend to give those. Yeah, business travel is fine. It will be.
Well, we interviewed Emirates President Tim Clark earlier in the year, and he actually made a really great point that really kind of threw me back on my heels. He said, business travel will be fine. Fundamentally, I take a long enough view on this that, there are so many small to medium-sized enterprises that have come to market, and guess what? It's created wealth, it's created investment, and it's created a desire to travel. Those people working for those companies want to be out in the world, whether it's for leisure or their business, is that as long as that trend toward entrepreneurship and these new, and whether it's startups or a growing mid-sized tier are entering the marketplace, that fundamentally people want to see the world if they can, right? I mean, Canada removes its restrictions, the number goes through the roof. SARS, we looked at the data back at the beginning of COVID. Once the restrictions lifted and SARS, effectively came to an end, huge spike. Again, 2.1 million people traveled through TSA checkpoints yesterday. 2.1 million. It's the most since Labor Day. And here we are, folks are back to school, businesses are operating on more of a normal rhythm. So yes, I think this is definitely, we're not at new normal, but I think it's gonna, people want to be out in the world. So, question. You just yell it, I'll repeat it back to him. Yeah.
About supply chain? Have you been looking at that data? Because we're seeing it already.
Well, I think one of the things that we've seen is actually a major divergence, and I'm not sure if other folks have seen this in their own businesses, but between how the US handled its supply chain, domestic supply chain, and how Europe handled its supply chain in terms of aerospace. I think certainly from Europe took a much more hands-on approach in terms of stability for its supply chain at different tiers. The US sort of took a more laissez-faire attitude around whether it's payroll protection plan or whatever to really kind of reinforce that. But in terms of, that's in terms of the strategic stability of both. I think without it, I mean, I heard one company last week said they usually bring product over from China to sell in the United States. That's usually about $1,000 for a shipping container. They paid 17. I mean, so these numbers are crazy. I was spoken
17,000.
17,000. Thank you. Yes, not $17. Yes, if you can find a shipping container for $17, get on that. Speaking to Garmin recently, actually, and they said that a lot of small electronic components that they use, whether it's chips or whatever, their avionics business, a 95-cent component pre-pandemic was being available on the spot market for $20, and they didn't have an opportunity to go negotiate it because guess what? They've got business jet manufacturers who need their kit. They've got OEMs all over who need their equipment to whether it's retrofit or on the assembly line. I think one of the things that's really, really fascinating here, and forgive the divergence a little bit, but is around business travel on business jets. We've seen a huge spike in the availability of, or lack of availability of light jets. You cannot find a light jet available on the market right now. They are actually appreciating in value and going for more than they were sold for, being flipped around. Airplanes are being imported from Europe all over the place to do this. But here's the thing. For the first time, in the reverse of the global financial crisis, you have aircraft manufacturers who are seeing a constraint in ability to go up in production because of supply chain issues. But the benefit of that is they actually have pricing power for the first time in their entire contemporary lives as business jet manufacturers. So I think these are going to be really, really fascinating dynamics around supply chain, around people, but also what that finally does to the OEM side in terms of how it actually does its business, because largely we have not seen a huge impact in terms of delivery disruption. I mean, there are plenty of other things that have disrupted deliveries at OEMs, whether it's Boeing and Airbus in terms of COVID and other issues over at Boeing in terms of quality and the FAA, all the way down in terms of actually just getting airplanes. So I think that it really actually has spared aerospace and aviation so far, but I think that that trend, I think, is going to begin to kind of drive product availability and also how people are actually doing their business travel.
Yeah, if you ask me what keeps me up at night about the aviation industry in the near term, it's that. And I don't just mean parts, I mean just the shortages. Look, I mean, the airlines had to do what the airlines had to do, right? Survival mode. You offload staff, you stop deliveries, they stopped production of parts. This aviation is not unique in the supply chain challenge from a part level. However, I take that one step further, and this is kind of how I look at supply chain thing. Airlines still do what they need to do to get running. Aircraft manufacturers still do what they need to do to produce aircraft. How are we doing that today? There are container ships lined up off Long Beach, waiting to just get a place to park, right? So the stuff isn't flowing like it used to flow. We haven't fixed the supply chain problem yet. Things are still working. And here's that next kind of level of thinking. If you can't move it on boats, and that's how we used to use it, how do you move it? Guess what? Airplanes. Sounds great. Cargo's phenomenal, right? Cargo is phenomenal right now, particularly wide body, long haul cargo. Why is that? It's because of the supply chain shortage, and it's because of the belly space shortage, right? So cargo is something we're watching very closely right now because, and again, cargo is split up into all sorts of different measures. I think there's huge growth to be seen in regional cargo for sure, because there really wasn't before. Wide body cargo, I get questions all the time. Oh man, how quickly should I go and get a conversion slot for my A330? Well, you're not going to get one, but by the time that's done, a lot of the problems that's creating your market today aren't going to be there. So these are the type of things that we look at with the supply shortage today. Okay, we have the supply shortage. Everywhere's feeling it. Try to get a new car. Try to get a rental car, for crying out loud. How are we getting past that today? And we're paying for it by the best way we know possible. That's air cargo. That's long haul wide body dedicated aircraft on air cargo, which by the way, didn't exceed 2019 levels until this summer sometime. So it's not that there's been this huge influx of cargo. It's just that there's been no other way to carry it, right? So these are the type of things we think of with the supply chain challenges. Yes, it's going to hit production. The MRO teams, I mean, good luck. You guys manage it the best anybody can, but just to have just a backlog of not only parts and stuff, but aircraft that maybe weren't flying, that were parked, that now need to be brought back into service. It's a real challenge. It's what concerns me in the near term for the industry, for sure. Okay. Very good.
Great section. I feel a lot smarter now after listening to that panel than I did going into it, which is how I often feel when I'm reading the air current. So thanks for sharing that. Next up, we have lunch in our display hall. So please enjoy your lunch. Take time to visit the tables, and we will see you back here at 12:30 for Senator Wicker. Thanks very much.